The milk book, now called The Raw Truth About Milk by William Campbell Douglas, was mentioned a lot in Arjun's writing, so I decided to read it for myself. This video is not medical advice. Here's the raw truth I've learned. When you pasteurize milk, it's no longer milk, but a milk flavored drink. If people drank milk in place of pasteurized milk, people's intelligence would go up and medical bills would go down. Both homogenization and pasteurization alter milk so badly that it causes atherosclerosis and degenerative arthritis. The author is convinced that the homogenization is worse than the pasteurization. There's this enzyme called XO that only comes from dairy fat globules. When you homogenize milk, it passes through the gut walls when it normally doesn't, when it's not homogenized, because it would be too big, causing atherosclerosis, because it hardens your arteries. Plasminogens are a type of glycophospholipids that's replaced by XO in your heart when there's arterial blockage. In areas of the heart that's not hardened, there's a normal amount of plasminogens. XO depletes your plasminogens and then replaces it, causing atherosclerosis. Synthetic vitamin D activates XO, which is normally added to milk. Vitamins in the form of supplements and fortification are toxic because they're synthetic and can't be utilized by the body. Vitamin D, which is added to milk, will induce vitamin D toxicity. It mentions that despite baby formula not listing it in ingredients, it causes even more vitamin D toxicity. It's worse than with dairy milk. Animals who are fed pasteurized milk with synthetic vitamins suffer just as if the vitamins weren't added at all. Vitamin D causes atherosclerosis when it's synthetic. The author states that he dislikes pediatricians as a public health fanatics. I can't state the reasons why specifically on YouTube. He dislikes gynecologists as incompetent and lousy surgeons. Gynecologists are the mouthpieces of the pharmaceutical companies. Doctors, nutritionists, and dietitians are all colluding together to destroy raw milk's image and your health. The authorities have the truth inverted. Reality is, raw milk is clean milk and pasteurized and homogenized milk is dirty. But the propaganda says the opposite, and that raw milk is dirty and pasteurized and homogenized milk is clean. The establishment jumps at every opportunity to demonize raw milk, whilst ignoring its pasteurized counterparts and other foods. There's a big history lesson in the book about how, yes, milk was dirty because there wasn't any milk certification processes. People noticed it and raw clean milk began to be supplied, but the problem is that there were people determined to push pasteurization. There were fanatics, but there were economic reasons for heating milk, because raw milk sours, and if you pasteurize it, it appears fresh for longer. Money was put over human health. Pasteurizers at the beginning of the 20th century were seen as dirty and were sniffed out by regulators. If you had to pasteurize, that means you wanted to cover up the poor quality of your milk, and people hated them. It took decades of propaganda to convince lawmakers to make pasteurization mandatory, and consider that the idea was so horrible that they refused to offer the consumers the choice. They had to force pasteurization on everyone. If milk gets contaminated today, the chances are that it will be after pasteurization. Pasteurized milk and raw milk are equally susceptible to contamination by pathogenic bacteria. Professor Fosgate of the Dairy Science Department of the University of Georgia. Pasteurization is associated with lowering the mortality rate, but the dirtiness comes from the lack of sanitation practices, not the fact that the milk was raw. pasteurization still causes diseases late in life. People shouldn't have drank dirty milk at all, whether it was raw or pasteurized, and today, with raw milk sanitation practices, there's no reason to pasteurize. There was never a reason to pasteurize. It's absurd that current practices are dictated by the conditions of the past. I said pasteurization was associated with lowering mortality, not that it actually caused it. The author points to another possible cause, which is the automobile. Our cities were filthy because of horse manure, and since the invention of the automobile, of course, everything became cleaner and people's mortality rates dropped. Pasteurized milk does make people ill, but what happens is that people have been conditioned to believe pasteurization by default is the correct state for consumption, and any sickness from consuming pasteurized milk is because of insufficient pasteurization. It's either that or blaming some external factor. It's just complete conditioning and brainwash. Phosphate is needed for the absorption of calcium, yet pasteurization destroys phosphate. From my own knowledge, phosphate, or lack of, is used to measure how well food has been heat treated. The decalcification of milk causes osteoporosis. Women can start losing their spinal bone mass by 20. Half of it can be gone by 70. This is amplified by many calcium wasting problems on top of drinking pasteurized milk that you can get in life, such as alcoholism, vitamin C and vitamin D deficiency, and pharmaceuticals. The calcium does stay there, but it can't be used by the body and causes calcification of the arteries and joints. The calcium should be used by your bones, but since it's both pasteurized and there's no phosphate, it calcifies your arteries and joints. Rosalind Walton found that the way to relieve calcification from your tissues is by consuming raw cream. You get both osteoporosis, degenerative arthritis, and atherosclerosis from consuming pasteurized dairy. In the former, you lack calcium from raw foods, and in the latter two cases, you have too much calcium from cooked foods. Lipase is used for the digestion of fats. Pasteurization destroys lipase, and homogenization causes it to go from the milk fat into the milk liquid, so you can't digest the fats. Lactase is used for milk sugar digestion, and that's destroyed by pasteurization. Heating milk turns the lactose into beta lactose, which is more rapidly absorbed into the bloodstream. Lactic acid causes milk to sour, and that's destroyed by pasteurization. That's one reason why pasteurized milk rots instead of souring. It's not noticed because people drink milk before it rots, but if they grew up with raw milk, they would know that raw milk remains an edible food after its freshness expires, unlike with pasteurized milk. Lactic acid counteracts harmful bacteria. The bacteria that spoils pasteurized milk originates from the pasteurization itself. There's no correlation between the bacteria count in milk and how long it keeps. Native Americans used to be breastfed until they were 9 because they believed the longer you were breastfed, the longer your longevity. Eskimos were breastfed until they were 15. Bottle feeding is dangerous because when the baby sucks on bottles instead of breasts, the woman produces less milk because there's less prolactin secretion. Human milk is similar to blood with enzymes, hormones, cells, and antibiotics. If a child isn't breastfed, then they're more likely to be sick after the breastfeeding period has ended. It's not best practice to drink human milk from a bottle since the breathing rate of the baby is different when it does that. Bottle feeding results in misaligned teeth because the mechanics are different from breastfeeding. Babies are more likely to develop cavities if they're bottle fed. Not all milk is high lactose. Walrus milk has very little lactose, and walruses cannot be reared on cow milk, which is 4% lactose, because they'll get diarrhea. Walruses that are raised while mothers in captivity are given blended raw fish and whipped cream. He talks about an experiment where diabetics were given 5 quarts of milk, which equaled half a pound of milk sugar, and got better. A patient named Jim Redblood had hardened arteries and acidosis and was on a milk fast, meaning he only drank raw milk for 10 days until he had extreme weakness, which was typical for patients. He was allowed a bowl of chicken soup daily, but otherwise stuck to the milk fast. Using this milk therapy, his strength rapidly returned, despite the high amounts of lactose, a sugar, in the diet. A great quote from the presiding MD. The treatment of various diseases over a period of 18 years with a practically exclusive milk diet has convinced me personally that the most important single factor in the cause of disease and in the resistance to disease is food. I have seen so many instances of the rapid and marked response to this form of treatment that nothing could make me believe that this is not so. J.E. Crew. For those who argue that the animal experiments don't apply to other species, I give you this quote from the book. From the point of view of scientific philosophy, the largest achievement of modern biochemistry has been the demonstration of the fundamental unity of the chemical processes associated with life. Rene Dubus. Cows and humans produce an abnormally nutritious milk called the colostrum just before and after delivery. It's 10 to 17 times the iron, 10 times the vitamin A, and 3 times the vitamin D of regular milk, with extra minerals and antibodies. I want to state, the milk therapy that J.E. Crew used was with regular milk. Imagine the potential using colostrum. As usual, the contemporary medical societies did not like the findings. Scurvy is not from lack of fruit or eating meat. Actually, doctors recommended lime juice in the 18th century for treating scurvy. There was a polar expedition in 1876, and Sir George Nares reported that lime juice didn't prevent scurvy, and despite this, they blamed it on lack of sunlight and amusement. The same year, there was another expedition, except the crews were fed walrus milk and fat without lime juice, and despite this, the doctors religiously clung onto the lime juice theory. Fluorescent lighting destroys half the vitamin C in milk over 24 hours. It creates a light-induced oxidized flavor. Raw milk has 33% more vitamin C, and babies who are fed pasteurized milk develop scurvy-like symptoms, unlike ones who are fed raw milk. Poshner proved that there is a deficiency similar to scurvy that could be cured with an endocrine product that lacks vitamin C. Stephenson failed to cure scurvy with tomato juice, but was able to do so with raw meat. Both raw meat and raw milk cure scurvy. In short, the reason for pasteurization is a mix of half-truths, fanaticism, and economic consideration. Ostensibly, it's about health, but Those are the real reasons. All in all, it's a S-tier book that you definitely need to read, not only to learn about raw milk and pasteurization, but a lot of other scams that are in our society. The milk back then was much healthier because the soils weren't as depleted, meaning the grass that ruminants ate was much healthier. So you're not going to be able to heal as easily as people did then.